First, I want to thank you for being here for the last session. We really appreciate it. And I have mostly good news in this short presentation, and I will keep this brief. First, I just wanted to say I'm presenting on behalf of CASINet. And for this presentation, I count as Haitian, which is always my greatest love. I'm incredibly honored to be able to work with my colleagues at GESCIO, where I do all of my work. And the CASINet network is a network in Latin America, and I will tell you about the countries in just a minute. So this talk is about improved survival over time in patients with TB and patients with HIV over the last 15 years. I just wanted to start with a reminder about the changes in the guidelines. So the WHO guidelines in 2006 recommended ART for patients with a CD4 count less than 200 or stage 4 disease. In 2010, that shifted to less than 350 or stage 3 or 4 disease. And 2013, less than 500, and in 2015, universal ART. And the guidelines for patients with TB also shifted so that once we diagnosed TB, we started ART earlier. So back in 2006, patients were eligible for ART according to WHO guidelines if they had extrapulmonary TB or pulmonary TB with a CD4 count less than 350. And then the timing of ART, there was a big concern about IRIS and adverse drug events. So the guideline was, if you diagnosed a patient with TB, start ART, even if their CD4 count was under 200, start ART 2 to 8 weeks after TB treatment when the patient had stabilized on TB treatment. If the CD4 count was 200 to 350, ART could be delayed until after the intensive phase. And if the CD4 count was greater than 350, you could delay ART until after TB treatment was complete and then reassess ART eligibility. So that was all for patients with pulmonary TB. With extrapulmonary TB, you would have treated immediately because that counted as stage 4. In 2010, based on studies that showed higher mortality if you had advanced AIDS and you delayed antiretroviral therapy in patients with TB, the guidelines shifted to say, you know what, TB HIV it's a terrible synergy. So when you diagnose the patient with TB, start ART sooner and within the first 8 weeks. And then in 2013 and 2015, the guidelines said, you know, if the CD4 count is less than 50, ART should be started within 2 weeks after starting TB treatment. So the cohort that we have is people living with HIV enrolled on ART at CASINet sites in Brazil, Chile, Haiti, Honduras, Mexico, and Peru. It was all patients who were at least 18 years of age. They were ART naive at their first clinic visit from 2006 to 2015, and we defined baseline tuberculosis as TB diagnosed before or within 30 days before or after enrollment. These are the baseline characteristics by TB status. So our cohort had 19,197 patients. Of those patients, 1,306 or 7% had baseline TB. The patients, these are the characteristics by TB status. So you can see that TB was more common in males, in patients from Haiti or Peru, in patients that had primary education or less, in those of older age, and those with lower CD4 count. So Brian Shepard had a poster at CROI in 2019, and his question was, it is also the CASINet cohort, our question from CASINet, was, with those guidelines that have shifted to recommend earlier antiretroviral therapy, had we indeed started therapy earlier? So he characterized the temporal trends in the time of ART initiation, and he compared trends between people living with HIV with and without baseline TB. He assessed the median time to ART initiation as a function of baseline TB status, CD4 count, and year of enrollment from a multivariable Cox regression model. And he did two-way interactions that included TB status, CD4 count in year, and the model adjusted for sex, education, and age, and was stratified by site. So this is an amazing slide, and I'm going to transition from this into the slide showing lower mortality. So the key points from this slide, this was Brian's slide from CROI. If you look at each of these four curves, the one on my left is CD4 of 100, then you have CD4 200, CD4 350, and CD4 of 500. So if you look at the right side of each one of those curves for the year 2015, you can see we have antibody, both for patients with T and without sites in Latin America. But if you look back at the left side of these curves, 2006, particularly in the CD4 of 500, those patients without TB were waiting over 600 days to start ART. And the patients with TB and CD4 counts of 500 were at 500 days. So a massive change in the time to ART initiation, particularly with patients with higher CD4 counts. On the other hand, the patients with the CD4 counts of 100, we were quite a lot faster, less than 100 days, and we improved, but we were already doing pretty well for the patients with CD4 counts of 100. So in the current study, we investigated whether there was a corresponding decrease in mortality that went along with this faster initiation of ART. Our statistical approach, you're tired. It was very similar to what I just told you Brian Shepherd did at CROI. Probability of survival with the Kaplan-Meier analysis, Cox proportional hazards model, a Cox proportional hazards model with interaction effects, and we looked at the probability of 1-year mortality as a function of baseline TB, CD4 count, sex, education, and age stratified by study site, and again, the two-way interactions between enrollment year and baseline CD4 count, enrollment year and baseline TB status, and baseline CD4 count and baseline TB status. And Brian is so very sophisticated, he and Ara Kim, of course, they controlled, the continuous variables were fit with natural splines to relax the linearity assumptions because they are brilliant. Don't ask me a question about splines. The 1-year mortality by TB status, this is a Kaplan-Meier curve, and the blue curve is baseline TB. The red curve is no baseline TB. And this is among all of the patients in the cohort. That includes 2006 to 2015. You can see the probability of survival was lower for the patients that had TB at 0.93, while it was 0.96 for the no TB group. Now we wanted to look at how that changes over time. So the table of the Cox model with interaction effects, these are predictors of mortality. So baseline TB, age, sex, education, year of enrollment, and baseline CD4 count, all of those were predictive of mortality as you would expect from other studies. When we did the two-way interactions, year of enrollment and baseline CD4 count were significant, but the baseline TB, year of enrollment, and the baseline TB and CD4 count were not. So I just have 2 more curves to show you, I think. The 1-year survival over time by TB status, you can see, looking from 2006 to 2015, the probability of survival has increased. The red line is the patients with no TB. The blue line is for patients with TB. So yes, we have done better. Over time, our survival has improved with and without TB, though the TB patients have a little bit lower survival than the patients without TB. And then if you look at the interaction plot between the year of year and CD4 stratified by TB, you can see on the left is the patients with no TB, on the right is patients with TB. So each one of these lines is a different CD4 strata. So the bottom line in both of these is 100, then above that 200, above that CD4 350, above that 500. So you can see even in the people with the CD4 count of 500, we're doing better over time. Also 350, also 200. Now, when you get to the 100, we found a surprising result. For the patients without TB, survival improved, but for the patients with TB and a CD4 count of 100, we were a bit surprised to see the survival had not improved. So in conclusion, survival for people living with HIV is improving over time in Latin America, both for patients with and without TB, but there hasn't been an improvement in survival for patients with TB and a CD4 count of less than 100. So our next step is going to be to further evaluate the mortality trend in patients with baseline TB and advanced immunosuppression. We need to go through the data and look to see if it's an artifact of our data. Is it the fact that we were already starting ART pretty quickly? We need to try to figure this out because clearly those are the most vulnerable high-risk patients. So thank you very much.